Let's sketch it out for people, okay? It's not going to be the kind of collapse that doom porn kind of guys are saying. The banks won't collapse, and then one day you get up and nothing works. That might happen in locales, but it's not going to be that way globally, because there's billions of people out there, out of our population, that are working every day to keep the system afloat and functioning. As the old system dies, a new one is being born as we're here. As we're speaking now, there's people out there working they're sweating, they're drinking bad coffee and eating yesterday's pizza, trying to get code done this morning for this new development of our new economy, the new software economy. What you're looking at is basically the old system of material things dying and a new dynamic that is emerging that's based around software eating money, the way that software ate traffic control lights, the way that software ate the air traffic control system. When each and every one of these things happen, you see a disruption. We didn't see it with the traffic control lights much because we weren't involved in that world. We did see it here in the United States when the air traffic controllers were all fired, and most of them were replaced with software. And so we've seen this progression. And so it's going to continue on this way. So we won't have a major collapse, and everybody around the world says, oh, now we got to fix it. No, what's going to happen is that it's collapsing and crumbling continuously, and there are people in there working like mad to try and prop it up, but then there's other guys that are working just as mad to build the thing that's going to replace it. And so eventually we'll just stop propping it up, and everybody will move over into whatever the replacement is. And that's the way we're going to build sci-fi world. So as the automobile dies, we're going to find that there's more and more people producing flying cars of some form that don't use an internal combustion engine, and so on. And it's a natural way that humans work. So it's more like, the concept of anti-fragile, of continual repair, means you're never really subject to a total catastrophe. The worst that could happen is that part of it breaks, but you've gotten really good at fixing it or building a new one. And so this is really an exciting time if you want to think about it. There's a lot of doom porn in the let's say the New Age and the woo-woo world, right? And it's all misplaced, and it's guiding a lot of people away from what could be an extremely exciting time and participation in the new emerging science and software-based economies and world that's going on out there. There are people that will make millions of dollars, millions of pounds in new profits over these next 2 weeks. And they will do so because of this new economy being born right now, and they happen to be right there. And in a sense, it's kind of like a gold rush, only we're not out digging with shovels and this kind of stuff, and your gold is digital, and your shovel is a compiler, a software compiler, and a good idea. But that's your only limitation. You don't even have to get to Alaska to dig this gold out. You can do it from Bangladesh or Zambia or, Dublin. And you could be a homeless kid in Dublin with a phone who figures out a decent idea for an app and teaches himself a rudimentary JavaScript enough to make it enough to go use it as a demo to get somebody to back him. And it just goes that rapidly.
It's like a 21st century industrial revolution.
But correct. And it's not even industrial. It's something beyond that.
But what happens to people's jobs?
They disappear. So they better figure out a new way of doing stuff, because they're going to be replaced by robots and smart this and smart that. Just like the poor fellow that had a job lugging ice up those stairs to put into the ice boxes was replaced by the smart ice box, which was the refrigerator. So stuff like this happens all the time. This is why we are adaptable and can learn even at an old age, because we can learn. We should do it. And it's not that difficult. It takes a while to get your head wrapped around the words, but that's really your limitation, is that you don't understand the context in which people use words like TCP or IP or crypto or something like this. Once you grasp the context in which these words are starting to make sense to you, then you know you're on that path and you can master this. And it's my way of thinking, and maybe I'm arrogant. Okay, maybe I'm just really a nasty, rude, arrogant bastard, but it's my way of thinking that if one human did it, it may take me some time, but I can figure out how to do it too. That, we're basically all as stupid as each other. And so I can be as stupid as anybody else and learn my way through anything. And so far it's proven its way in the real world. And so I'm, basically someone says to me, blah, blah, I can't. It's like, okay, yeah, you just said you can't and therefore you won't. The minute you say I can, then you will, so fine, we got something to talk about.
But it shouldn't be just focused on technology. Surely, we have to look at the new industrial age, but not just technology, but other kind of sciences out there and other things that people can do as well.
There's an issue, okay? Yes, you don't have to look at it as just technology, but that's the underpinning. And it's the underpinning because we've hit this energy wall. Until we get some new form of energy that replaces oil pretty ubiquitously around the planet, we're in a dying energy environment. In that environment, you cannot afford to promote the idea that you can effectively hire 99,000 art historians this year. They're not contributing to getting that energy equation. And so, no, we can't afford to hire the 99,000 art historians, and maybe 45 or 50,000 of them should go be janitors, because we really need somebody to clean up, but we don't need more history about art. So we're at that point in history, where the species is under these pressures. Whenever the species has been put under these pressures, certain behavioral changes take place. Those behavioral changes are manifesting themselves all around us and trying to be suppressed by the powers that be because they're inimical to the powers that be lifestyle. They don't want to suffer. The powers that be don't want to be relegated to a back position by the burgeoning of the new century here, where the common man has the power to do all of this kind of stuff, and they are no longer powerful simply because they have currency, debt-based money, and so they're very worried about this. But at the same time, it's a renaissance. It's a huge opening for all of us if you can open your mind up. But unfortunately, the universe is harsh. And if you can't, then you're going to have to face an increasingly difficult struggle going forward. And it's not to say that there aren't things that are extremely useful that are not technical. There are, but we have to be really specific about saying that, yes, this is practical. I can do this, and it will result in some gain, and the universe will reward me for that value, because that's what it's come down to. We can't afford. The paper debt system dies in its last gasp. It got so exuberant, we thought we could afford to hire 99,000 art historian teachers when we only need 2.
Well, I'm glad you said that. We're coming to the end of the interview, but I'm glad you said that because time banking is catching on, and time banking is all about your energy and sharing your energy and, offering your skills that you can offer. And it doesn't have to be a trade, but just a skill. And we're seeing more and more. I've got information here I'll be reading out later regarding time banking in Ireland, but we know in America and the UK, time banking is taken off big time. And I think people have to be looking at time banking, which is a form of bartering. Are you bartering your energy? Because if the financial system goes down or it changes in some way, then you need to have a skill or an ability or something that's valuable that you can trade. And being a commodities broker in your neighborhood is not going to get you nothing.
Yes, yes.
So,
you will be commensurately rewarded. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you have to get practical, and you have to start looking at what your skill set is and what value can you bring to the community and people around you, and that's going to be your currency. Maybe it could be short term, could be long term, but I think it's going to be that's what people need to look at. But I'll tell you one thing. Oh, last minute question for Cliff before we wind things up. Okay, Steve?
Yeah, we have the very last question of the evening from Dave. Dave says, for Cliff, what's your view on the stability of cyber currencies? And does the high buy-in price of one Bitcoin limit its growth and therefore increase the chances of other cyber currencies taking a larger share?
Exactly. Let's take it from that and proceed back. Dave's quite correct. The other cyber currencies will take another existing share, but it's not going to reduce Bitcoin. Bitcoin's function is a store of wealth, and the entree into the cyber world, you need a Bitcoin in order to buy Ethereum. You need Ethereum to buy into these others, and it just goes from there. Bitcoin's function is not depreciated by the larger capital market, it's merely enhanced. So before it was a currency, now it's going to end up being a store of wealth and a sovereign or large corporation settlement vehicle, and we'll use Litecoin, Ethereum, and some of these other coins as our actual day-to-day kind of currencies. So it's all shaking out just as it should.
Okay, brilliant stuff. Well, Cliff, Thanks a lot for coming on. Really enjoyed the chat. Great information there. Loads for people to actually go back and listen to the interview again, because we bounced around everywhere, which is great when you can do that. Much appreciated for you coming on. We'll definitely do a part 3 if you're up for that in a few months' time. We'll see where we are then, maybe around September, October time. But we're going to pass you off to Steve. Steve's going to get all your contact details and where people can find you. Steve.
Yeah, great information, Cliff. A lot of people chatting amongst themselves, talking about this information on the chat rooms there. So you've definitely whetted some appetites. Half Past Human is your website there for anyone who wants to check out that. Some great information on there. We have put it in the chat room here and also on People's Internet Radio. In closing, Cliff, are there any other links that you want to throw out there for the audience this evening?
No, but if they want to follow me on Twitter at Clif_High, so CLIF_HIGH. I do put out updates as I'm going through the data occasionally, and it's just pertinent, but I wouldn't get it into a report. And so that would be the place to look for that. And they're aware that we have UVC, this high-intensity form of ultraviolet that's actually touching the surface of the Earth now. And never in my lifetime of 64 years has that occurred until this last year, in the last 12 months. And when it does do this, it creates all kinds of changes on the planet. And can be very deadly to humans and other life. Can literally, it's such a high frequency, it can literally scorch and cause desertification because it can burn down into the surface of the soil at some level. They also know that we're not facing the kind of global warming as it has been promulgated by the political fellows, that instead we are indeed on the cusp of entering into the Ice Age. And so they're worried about the impact of this energy thing, the huge amount of population we have, and the Ice Age, and these strange energies that are coming from space. Because these strange energies are coming in, they're part of the Ice Age process. And what is actually happening is that the corona of the sun is shrinking, and it is dropping from about 5,000 degrees Kelvin to about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. But it's a misnomer to think of it as a corona, and we actually need to think of it as a plasma, very much like the plasma that's on the arc of a heliarc or a TIG, tungsten ionized gas welder. And the plasma exists because of the ionized gas coming around it and the grounding effect and the charge that is created there, the short circuit basically, and that's what our sun is. It's not a nuclear reactor. And as a result of this, when it shrinks, more of the energy that is out there that the sun is plowing up and causing as it goes through interstellar space is actually flowing around the sun to affect all of the inner planets and all of us. That's why all of the planets have been experiencing what we would think of as global warming. It has nothing to do with people driving SUVs on Mercury. Mercury was hotter because of the burst of the new energies that we got. Now we're all getting into this condition where all the planets are being impacted by these unknown energies from space, and they're also impacting us. The planets react, our Earth is reacting with more violence in the form of earthquakes, volcanoes, and more clouds as the UVC causes more precipitation, more evaporation to cause more precipitation, causing these huge rivers in the sky and all of this. All this stuff was predicted by our data sets, and it pointed to UVC in 1999. We got the first hints of that. And so I knew it was going to develop, and here we are. And so now, as humans, we are starting to react to these unknown energies from space. It's making us jittery. It's difficult on our systems. It would be the equivalent of standing around in the dreaded 5G Wi-Fi testing room, that sort of thing. And we're getting it from the sun. And people are just not recognizing this, and so they're reacting to the energies in a fashion that is not conscious, and therefore they feel jittery and irritable, so they take out that irritation in the form of anger when it's not really justified, and they need to look at it in a different way, because we're going to be going through these for a number of decades. And so the sane person would, or the rational being would say, hey, you know, my mind is being affected by these unknown energies from space, and maybe I can do things about it in a specific way. And those same things could also be done, and they would help ameliorate some of the problems that we have with our existing electromagnetic radiation pollution.
Well,
sort of makes sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And I was just going to say, it's affecting, it's not affecting everybody, just a certain people in the population that this is affecting.
Let's explore that for a second, okay? Let's say that poor Ireland is uniquely, not uniquely, you're going to be the same as certain other areas around the northern hemisphere, including areas, for instance, where the Hopi Indians live in the southwest of the United States. This is because of the crystalline nature of the rock that you guys live on. And your rock is really pure crystal in a lot of different ways. And so that crystalline energy is going to react to, magnify, and impact, and maybe modify, but in this case it's going to magnify these unknown energies from space that are coming in at frequencies that we can't even really measure, but we're certainly feeling. And so that's why places like Ireland are going to get hit by this really hard. And we see certain parts of the Earth react with more intensity of, say, earthquakes, because that's the nature of how that rock is going to happen, how it's going to react, like in Japan. So in Japan, they're actually getting into sort of a calming state because the ground underneath them is reacting, excuse me, and is splitting up, whereas the ground in your area is reflective and is magnifying these. The reason individuals are reacting differently, it goes to exactly that same issue. The rocks in them, so to speak, their mineral levels. So those people that are without the appropriate minerals that allow those cells to deal with the radiation get the impact of that radiation on the cell in a non-resonating way. So in other words, if your cell had an appropriate mineral level, and say it was selenium, and that selenium was vibrating at a certain frequency, it would take that energy that's coming on in, and that selenium would do what it does with that energy, which is dissipate it back into universe because it resonates at that same frequency. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs selenium. I'm just choosing it as an example. And so in this case, those people that didn't have an effective selenium level would find their cells were actually irritated. The organism, their body, was being harmed by the radiation, having no ability to be grounded, if you will, outside of their system. But there's good news to this, and that is that we're dealing with the kind of energies that may be able to be actually grounded out to some degree in some places. So we may find, for instance, that some people will feel better by simply taking their shoes off and spending 20 minutes a day, kneading their feet into the earth and the soil and the grass around them, and it will dissipate some of the energy. It may not work in all areas because of the nature of the soil at that spot. The reason I would say that has to do with my training, so to speak, though. See, I come from a physical, meditative environment, Zen and Vipassana. In both meditation schools, it is recognized that you can meditate all day long, but if you're sucking down coffee, you're not going to get calm. So the consciousness only has a certain degree of impact. And so trying to control these things consciously, in my opinion, while it may have some level of impact, some level of effect, I don't know that it would even be noticeable given the amount that's flooding in around the sun. This is not something you're going to be able to think your way out of, so to speak.
Yeah, because there's people around me I've seen just doing things that are against what they would normally do. And I'm thinking, what's going on there? Why are they kind of the way they are? And I'm sure the listeners to this show can kind of look around their friends and family or people they might know and go, that's not the same person. They're just being irrational. What's the negativity? What's the aggression? Obviously, this is what it's down to.
Correct. And see, you can see it in how it occurs in the brain, because the brain is actually a very crystalline structure. It's a liquid crystal antenna. And so what's going on is that as these strange energies come in from space, we're not used to dealing with them. Our brains maybe have never experienced them before. And as they come through our brain and affect our body, thoughts are thrown in different directions. So you're going to have differing kinds of thinking. But in addition to that, you're going to have different hormonal responses. This has to do with how your body is formed, so to speak, around the pancreas, the liver, and the spleen, and how those are the sources of where radiation damage occurs. So most people are unaware of this, but you could get, say you were near a nuclear reactor and you accidentally sucked in some plutonium and got the plutonium into your lungs. Certainly you would have problems from the plutonium in your lungs, but it's actually going to be the problem caused by the radioactive blood in your liver that is going to kill you. And so it's not going to be lung cancer or that sort of thing. So your liver and your spleen and your pancreas are all reacting to these energies very much as though they were working around nuclear reactors. And that's where we have to deal with that would seem to be an appropriate place to begin dealing with the various different kinds of radiation that we have to now. And even if we didn't have the stuff coming in from the sun, as you note, we've got in all this strange EMF with all the new 5G, all the Wi-Fi, and all of this to deal with. So we now have to start really looking at the human body and what it takes to make us healthy in a sea of radiation that we had not anticipated living in.
Well, Elon Musk wants to go down the AI route. And this is the intelligent dust that he's talking about. It mightn't be the case that they'll actually physically have a microchip. We might be inhaling this intelligence dust from the chemtrails. And before we know it, we are programmable, or it's in our system and we can't get rid of it.
I would buy the idea that it would be in our system and we couldn't get rid of it. I don't buy the idea that it's programmable or that you can have smart dust, and here's why. Once you get down to a certain threshold of nano properties, it's impossible to send out communications to them. as radio guys, you would recognize this. The radio frequencies you're sending to try and control the dust would be so large the dust couldn't react to that level of frequency. And we would not be able to make a frequency so fine that the dust would be able to react to it. And again, the dust would have no intelligence whatsoever, no computational ability at any level at all, and thus can't react to a comprehensive command signal from anywhere. So basically, you have to have we're limited in physical size. Fear. Well, they didn't want me talking about this, but basically the nanodust is a fear. It's a FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's not real. We can't, as software guys, make chips below a certain size or two things occur. We can't get our commands into the chip to make it react, and even if we could, the thing heats up so much that we couldn't control the heat. Anybody that's got a SIM card or a micro SIM card in the back of their phone that has done some significant storage of information will recognize how hot these things get. So nanodust is some kind of a mind thing, but it does not exist.
But are we assuming that we're using man-made science and the man-made laws of physics? Who's to say that
there's no other physics that operate on our planet? So we know, for instance, that Victor Schauberger found a way to make an implosion engine. We also know that an implosion engine was created out of sound by Kirby in the 1800s, and that these were suppressed. We also know that you can get hypersonic flight from the implosion engine and so on. But none of these technologies get down to a level to where you can have something. It's kind of like, okay, you can make a computer really small, but the smaller you make it, the more it's going to have to just shed heat to the environment, so the more it's going to heat up. The energy requirements get really big, and once you get it down below a certain level, what's it operating on? It's certainly not operating on energy at the level of electronics, at the electron. And so if it's not operating at the electron level, we'll never be able to talk to it, because we can't communicate with anything without electrons. Make sense?
Yeah, no, that does. It's just we've heard about this so-called smart dust.
Sure. And we've heard about a lot of stuff, yeah?
Yeah, so we'd have to do the research on it and look into it a bit more. Right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We already have loads of questions coming in for you, Clif, so we might as well start on the questions and take it from there. We're going to be bouncing around, but, sure. Why not? Steve?
Okay, yeah, plenty of questions. You said earlier, Clif, about this stuff that's coming down from the sun and it's affecting the earth. I'm just wondering, what part does chemtrailing play in this? Because we were told before, or we've heard before, it has been suggested, one school of thought is that a lot of the stuff that's being sprayed with these chemtrails is to try and reflect whatever it is coming from the sun, reflected back out into outer space, so it won't hit the earth.
I believe that that's the core reason that they're doing that. There's probably other agendas. They may be shoving other stuff in there. You may have the CIA trying weird experiments and all this kind of stuff. But I believe that at its core, it's intended to reflect these energies. So,
and essentially, chemtrailing is supposed to be a good thing, but it has potential to be a very bad thing as well.
It's both. In this universe, we can't have anything other than challenges. There's always a good aspect and a bad aspect. I actually know when they don't chemtrail here, we can jump from 46 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning to 96 degrees Fahrenheit 5 hours later, and it is a very intense white sun that we're dealing with, and that this is not good for humanity. So the removal of chemtrails, as much as I like Dane Wingington, and I understand, I've lost my ability to have solar panels here. They just simply no longer work in the Pacific Northwest. Because of the chemtrailing. But even so, even with the destruction of the forests and so on, I am uncertain at this point that the stopping of them would be a good thing.
Yeah, we just talking about the white sun, we spoke about that, I think it may have been last year. We all used to remember the orange sun, and all of a sudden then the orange sun was white. And completely different thing altogether. We have a question from PIR chat room. It says, Is it human? I'm going to read this as it is. Maybe it might make sense. Is it human will and intelligence / consciousness that is creating the effects that we are experiencing from the mineral and cosmic dimension?
Certainly. Is that consciously controllable? That would be the question. Not enough people, I believe, would benefit or would be able to do that to benefit. But certainly at that level, everything we experience in reality is entirely subjective, 100% entirely internal. There is no such thing as external reality. Therefore, it all is being manifest and decoded at that conscious level.
So being that it's subjective means that we're creating our own consciousness. We're creating what we see on our life through that.
Yes, but here's the rub, Guy. When you say we're creating, you're quite right. But you're only 1/3 of what you think you are. So you got 2 other thirds up there that are deciding what you need, and so you may be deciding what you want, and you don't get that, and that's why.
Okay.
Because see, you're living in. You think you reside in your body. Your body actually resides. Your physical corpus actually resides inside your consciousness. That consciousness is so large it can't be shoved into your body. There's 2 other major components of it. You have a knowing mind and a thinking mind, and you're living in what we call the body mind, or the body feeling mind. This 1/3 of it. So those other components are going to give you the experience that you require, not what you in this 1/3 isolation feel that you need or want.
A friend of mine said this, and I thought it was quite profound and probably close to the mark. She said to me that it's like we're in. You remember the game Sim City?
Never played it.
Okay,
but I understand the concept.
You understand the concept. So you create life basically, and you're in Sim City, and you create the industries and the schools and everything else, and you have to manage the whole kind of structure of society. And it's like our higher self is running a Sim City, and we are the people in the Sims.
Exactly. Exactly so. Very fitting indeed, yes.
Yeah,
we have about as much control.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was a good analogy. It's very good. Steve?
Okay, a question from Graham. Is Cliff aware of Mike Montagne's MPE, the mathematically perfected economy?
No, I haven't. I'm not aware. No.
Okay, it's basically...
And actually, I would argue that anything that comes out of a single individual is less than what we can come up with collectively, and a mathematically perfected economy won't do humans any good because we've got to be messy in order to progress.
Right, okay, so we need the yin and the yang, so to speak.
Yes, yeah.
Well, that's how we learn. I mean, if life was easy, then we wouldn't really be learning, I suppose. It's just sometimes the negative side can be very negative, and the experiences can be harrowing and pretty bad. That's the only problem.
No, that's okay. So those things are true, but let's examine the idea that everything that we experience is 100% subjective. Okay, that there is in fact no external reality, that we're bound by whatever our senses funnel into us. Okay, yeah. I dispute David Icke, and I think we only have 4 senses, and they're defined by sensory organs, and they're all within our cranium. But other than that, I'm pretty much in line with a lot of the stuff that he says. If that is the case, then the suffering that we feel is obviously something we need because we're causing it. It's obviously something that's in our control. It's obviously something that we're participating in as an active person. And so thus we come to Buddha's argument, and also the argument for all the Zen and the other meditations, whereas you, as the ultimate subjective experiencer, provide the experience that you're going through because you need to do it. Therefore, at any time, should your consciousness decide to wake up, it can decide to thereafter consciously direct the experience and see what happens. And you can indeed do that, and that is the secret that Napoleon Hill and all of these people, make yourself rich by thinking, think and grow rich, all of these kind of things. It is all 100% accurate, and that is why we're here. Now, many people are not able to think their way out of things, and much of it has to do with the situation they've gotten themselves into, but also, from my understanding of how things work, the more we take care of our bodies and provide it what it needs, then the less we have that impinging on our consciousness and drawing us away from making these appropriate decisions. So,
another way of saying it to a certain extent, well, it depends on how your outlook on life is and your spirituality, but some people would say we had a soul contract and we've come down here to learn lessons, and part of this is maybe our subjective approach to life, and the things that are happening have been preordained.
You could think of it that way, and that's certainly valid in any given life, okay? But that presupposes you're only examining one life, and that's it, and you're done. If you were to look at it from another perspective of life after life after life, then it still pertains, but you have to give it a broader scope. And so preordained becomes not individual minutia, but rather the path you're on. And thus one could decide to walk in this life or to run in another life or to just simply sit in another life after that relative to that path. And I actually think that that's much more akin to what's going on. And that gives us great power. It also, though, presupposes certain things, and then if we look around, we can find some of these things do exist. So if that were the case, then one could say that, is all time the same? Are all time experiences potentially filled with X amount of suffering no matter what time I happen to incarnate in? And no, that's not true. And so one might then say, oh, look, because we're in a period of great suffering, we know that the next stage will not be so, simply because of the way that universe operates with oscillation. And so so then we can actually even confirm that we're coming out of the Iron Age and about to go into the Silver Age. Make sense?
Yeah.
Because there's so much suffering here, and it just naturally follows. And so we can take, actually, to a certain extent, one can take a measure of energy and growth out of the suffering itself.
Well, isn't there this kind of cycle, like a 26,000-year cycle, that we are on the up at the moment? We're going into the age of Aquarius. So the next 1,000 years or 26,000 years, we're going to be going into a nice area where that's all going to change, and we're going to be all, love and light and everything else. And then when that hits the peak of the 26,000, then it starts going down again, and then we go back into the dark ages, and then the whole cycle repeats again.
Yeah, I'd go along with that, except for the love and light business. Are perfect, because I think humans are always full of contention, and we're always going to be interacting based on our hormones, and there is no such thing as ascension and that sort of thing, and that we're basically sort of raspy critters, and the universe will provide us with the raspiness we need to continually to grow, and that there is no growth without irritation. If you've got an amoeba in a dish, it doesn't move if all the conditions are perfect.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, again, part of the spiritual belief for some people is that we have a kind of soul contract. We've come down here in this life to learn certain lessons, but we do have free will. And free will changes our dimensional path on what we go on, because we can choose to make a decision that might affect something for the rest of our life, or else we might choose not to do that. But there's all these kind of roads side by side, or dimensions side by side, and our free will determines which dimension we go down. But regardless of the dimension we choose, there are still lessons down there, that things that we have agreed to learn in that life. How would you?
I would go along with that 100%. We have to define the soul, though, because I don't have I can actually define it very precisely. And so the soul can't be lost. It can't be traded away. It's not what I am. It's it's conscious of itself as itself, but it's not conscious beyond that. And it is the repository, the database, if you will, of all of the things that I learn in this life. And then when I go into the metempsychoses, which is that period after the death barrier, in that period of time, the soul is cleansed. It's a template. And so all the stuff that is learned is like distilled down into a thick syrupy mass, a crystalline bit of intuition I take into my next life. And so whenever I get an intuition hint in this life, I know that that's something I learned in my last life, saying, hey, don't do this. I did that enough. You don't have to do it again this life. And I don't do that. Or I do that based on whatever the intuition guides. And that's where intuition comes from. So I can define all of that, and I agree with you 100%. I just provide it across a larger canvas, which is life after life after life. And the soul, its point, its purpose, its reason for existence is to bring over those things from life after life after life for me. And that's that. And so it doesn't dominate me. It's not me. It's just a different way of thinking about things. But you take a turn and you decide, no, I won't do that this life. And from that point on, everything changes for you. Well, it also changes for the next lives thereafter. It's this old saying in Vipassana meditation. It's like, let's see, it's before enlightenment, all is chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, all is chop wood, carry water, do dishes, sweep floors, and so on and so on and so on. And it makes no difference. That's the beauty of this saying is once you've reached a certain point, you realize it's 100% true and it doesn't matter at all.
So you have to climb the hill to actually go down the hill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's another belief as well out there that, some people, we talk about soul contracts and energy, and some people will say, God, that person, they had a great life, they had it very easy, and they died, and that was it. And other people have a really, really hard, extreme life. And there is a certain belief, on the spiritual side, that depending on the life you're going to come into, a part of the soul contract will depend on how much energy you're given. So if you're going to have a hard life, you'll never get 100% of your higher self because the physical body can't deal with that. So if you're going to have a hard life, you might get about 70%. But if you're going to have a fairly easy life, then you might only get about 30 or 40%.
I don't see it that way because of the way that energy works. It's you can actually, if you wanted to sit down and do the math, you can to some extent do the calculus for the energies involved in life based off this thing called Avogadro's number, which is related to how you measure a gram molecular weight of any given element. So you can use this as like your basis for doing math, and you can see that every life, the potential for energy is essentially the same at the key or the life force level. So that I would not accept at all, but I do understand that some people have easy lives and so on. And again, it doesn't relate in my understanding to this life per se. It relates to the metempsychoses. So the metempsychoses is that period of time and the thoughts and everything that occur to you after death and before your next life. During that period of time, there is what we can think of as a sleep or a rest where you recover and if you will, just don't do anything. Just rest from all of the integration of all the stuff you've learned in this life. And during that period, that's of a different length. So, for instance, Hitler's got a lot of stuff to integrate. So that guy might have to rest for 10 or 20,000 years for all anybody knows, right? And so somebody who's very young-souled, as they say in some of the traditions here, or young as a human is really what the term is. They might have a very easy life and then a very quick rest and reincarnate maybe within a generation as opposed to several thousands of years. But those people that are great on the planet, David Bowie, he needs a decent rest, and so he might not be back for a couple of thousand years. And it depends not on good or bad, but the amount of key you put out into the world and take back in. And so someone who has a nice, easy life, who doesn't face strife, who doesn't have to exhibit really huge levels of intestinal fortitude and put out that energy, they don't have to rest so much. And I think it's more that kind of a mechanism. Well, there's something major going on, and it's not the really famous people going down there now that's got me intrigued. It's the quantity of just regular guys going down and all the different kinds of jobs they're trying to get filled for Antarctica. Bearing in mind that right now it's the winter season down there, and it's usually a period of time they don't hire at all. But for the past 2 years, the quote Antarctic season is now basically 12 months out of the year. And so there have been more jobs posted this last month than existed the month before. And this means we're looking at basically a boom town kind of an environment going on down there. They're actually trucking down more supplies in the wintertime than has ever been done before. So they're just trying to support a build-out of some form. So now we're into a period where, like I say, I'm less interested in the Newt Gingriches and these kind of people going down and paddling around than I am by the Leidos, the corporation, and what they're doing, and by the 7 ships that were sent down to bring supplies to these bases in anticipation of new people arriving. And if you want to get on and look, there's lots of agencies that provide satellite photos, many of which have overlaps. Some of the overlaps are not blurred out. And you can see that there's very, very large bases and very large habitation in Antarctica, and it's not a couple of isolated little science stations here and there. In some areas, it looks as though maybe several thousand miles of the coast between these large areas are in constant use with what we might think of as like built-on ice freeways. Lots of vehicles going. We don't get to see the vehicles so much because of the satellite photos, but you can see that these are very clearly marked roadways that have what look to be permanent or semi-permanent light markers for night driving. And so somebody's doing a lot of activity down there, a lot of energy going into the place. At this point, I have an issue because of the pollution that hit my data sets from the whole Corey Good phenomenon. And I'm cleaning that out for another report in September, and I hope to have a different view of things that's a bit cleaner then. But just on the trackable material that's going down to Antarctica, we have to wonder why, in this global economic malaise, all these corporations are hiring as fast as they are able in such a wide range of occupations for such a place on the planet.
Yeah, why? What's down there? That's the thing.
Whatever it is, it's underground. We know that. Okay, we can actually make a lot of conclusions that are probably fairly sound based on what's going down there, because we see that there's a lot of excavation kind of equipment going down. And it's not so much what one would think of as the big D8 cats or the Caterpillar kind of a road pusher, road builder kind of material, but rather it's excavators. And some of them are rather specialized excavators, the kind that are used, for instance, in coal mines, that are, a certain height and so on. So whatever the corporations are seeking, they're not seeking it on the surface. There are some indications that the swap over is being made to some other energy source down there because of what they're buying. It looks as though someone's setting up a big coal plant. And as opposed to in the past, the goal had been to provide all the energy for Antarctica off of these nuclear reactors. And in the 70s, the United States had sent a couple of these small little nukes down there and had problems with them. And at first I thought that was the case, that, it was because they had had problems with them that they were setting up this big coal burning operation. But now I think maybe they just need the electricity, and so they're getting more open about what they're doing. But from what I've been able to look at in manifests, it looked like somebody's building a big coal-burning electric generation plant down there.
Yeah, well, there are kind of speculation as to they might have come across a certain race, either frozen or alive, and technology down there.
That's right, the Atlanteans we heard, wasn't it?
Yeah, but see, here's the problem, guys. A lot of that came out of the Corey Good stuff, okay? My data sets had certain emotional levels that were in there, and the data sets were polluted by this marketing effort that is around this guy by the name of Corey Good, who's claiming to be a time-traveling secret space participant. He's not saying he flew spaceships, but he worked in them and that kind of thing. And it's a bogus story. It is all fake. and there's this big marketing effort around it. And a lot of the stuff in the last, say, since his emergence on the scene in 2015, since then we have to assume that anything that's come out around these subjects has to be re-examined in great detail because it's all polluted by these lies. And this would include all the stuff from Michael Salla and the cohorts that are working with David Wilcock and Corey Goode. And so we have to now instantly throw away anything that Pete Peterson says, anything that David Wilcock says, because it is all, it's not suspect, it is all corrupted, it's all contaminated, it's all radioactive as far as I'm concerned. And then we have to start all over. So there is something going on, it is underground, and I don't think we can really speculate much beyond that until we get a new witness that's able to provide evidence as opposed to basic speculation and excrement.
I'm glad you mentioned the alternative media, because we've been told that 75% of the alternative media is either controlled or paid off. I suppose people like Alex Jones, I mean, I don't listen to Alex Jones at all these days whatsoever. If I do, I'll definitely keep a very open mind on what he says. And there is more and more people in the alternative media coming out and being exposed. And when you look into their background, they're looking who they're involved with. And I know I've watched one of your 2-year reports, all right, and you have mentioned Corey and David Wilcox, all right. Maybe there was one time a few years ago that you could kind of go with the information that came out, say, from David. But, you know, David's been on the show a couple of times on OAM, and maybe he's just been compromised in some way, and now the information that he comes out with is not exactly what should be brought out.
I think that that's the case. We could just be charitable and say that he's not paid off or anything. He's just a victim. Okay. I mean, I don't like victimhood or any of that, but he could have been conned by the people that are around Corey Goode and the whole organization. Someone is obviously working a con, working a game, in the sense that I can't see why anybody would give Corey Goode the airtime that he had on Gaiam. So right now I'm really wondering what's going on in that organization. I actually don't think anymore that it was Jay Widener that was associated with it, because now I've come to find out that Jay Widener was out and about with all these mummies and stuff. And so he probably was not participating in any of this Corey Goode stuff at that level. He may have had some peripheral part of it, I don't know. But somebody was obviously attempting to push an agenda, and it caused me problems and a lot of other people, and we've run into these issues. Whether David Wilcock was, in some way compromised or simply was a useful tool I'm willing to say he was simply a useful tool. I don't think he was, had any participation at that level, if you will.
Well, there was that incident a few years ago where he came on live and said his life was threatened, and Kerry Cassidy spoke to somebody.
But I say stuff like that happens all the time. I get death threats all the time. Doesn't bother me a bit. Maybe it seriously bothered him. He's not the same kind of guy I am, right?
Yeah.
I like fighting. I'm covered with scars. I enjoy it. I get something out of it. And so he may not. And I think he was very deliberately, or he was indeed expressing his fear. I don't think that was fake at all. Now, whether it was accurate or any of that is immaterial.
Yeah. And, of course, being involved in the alternative media, it's just, things like that do happen. That's the way it is.
Well, we can go back to your first statement there, if we could, where you said that 75% of the alternative media was compromised and so on. I don't actually buy that at all. I would easily say 75% of the alternative media is not to be listened to, or only listened to when you want a good chuckle. And that has nothing to do with being disinfo agents or being paid by any of the evil deep state or anything.
Yeah.
It's just the way humans are. We get all whipped up about stuff that we have no real knowledge of, and we go with it, and one thing leads to another, and then Bob's your uncle. Next thing you know, you're mega fabulous on the internet, and you've got a story to maintain, and what are you going to do?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And the thing is, what we've learned over the years, this is why we call our radio show Open Your Mind. Open your mind as in Aristotle, where you entertain the thought. It doesn't mean you have to accept it, But you entertain it and go, okay, how real is that? Okay, I'm going to go do the research and check it out and go down the rabbit hole and check it out and see what's down there, rather than just accept it for real. And we've heard stories and we've been told stuff over the years and that we found out it was bogus, as you say. But sometimes you have to go down the rabbit hole to check it out and then come back up and go, okay, that was a waste of time, but it had to be done.
Oh, that was my mistake. I was supposed to come back up.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to make sure you come back up and don't stay down there. Exactly. Well, we just entertain the information, and at the end of the day, if you, I would say, if you can't feel it, touch it, smell it, and taste it, but even then, you can still be fooled.
Wonder.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I agree that never truer words.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and you have to question yourself, and that's their plan, is that you start questioning yourself and your own kind of logical approach to things, because there's so much. I mean, they obviously, that when they realised how much potential the internet had for putting this information out there, as John Irwin said to us, who's a super soldier, said, when you bury the truth in a barrel full of lies, it's very hard to find it. And the whole idea of that, we'll give you 50% truth, 50% fake information, and then you have to try and decipher that and what resonates with you. And sometimes, I mean, it is hard. And when we get, on a daily basis, we get information in and see posts on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And you have to ask yourself sometimes, well, is that real or is that fake? So it is getting very difficult to separate, out what is truth and what is fiction. But I suppose we're getting a bit better at it.
But how
we have to.
Yeah.
I mean, they're giving us so much.
How I view it though is, sometimes there is a lot of truth and there are a lot of lies. But sometimes the way I see it is, there's so much there that we have to trawl through that. It's like, you ever see in some of those cartoons where someone is running and like they're trying to get to a point that's maybe 20 feet away, but they're running and they seem to be going forever and they're running in sludge and it's just slowing them down. I think that's how it is with a lot of, okay, there are truths there that we should know, but there are so many people who don't want us to know those truths, and they're putting loads of crap in our way just to slow us down, and we're so busy going down rabbit holes a lot of the time, that we I don't know.
No, I get you. I understand. It's frustrating, and it's as though you're playing their game.
Yeah.
And you start wondering, is there a bigger hand further back manipulating the game itself? It makes so much sense that indeed that's the case. They're putting out all of these stories, preventing us from finding these things, and then they even go to the trouble of preloading our brains with images, such that they can trigger those images and those images are put there from all the media, from the movies and all of this kind of stuff. And then they trigger those images, and they can at any time do this, such that with the language, they can cause these images to pop up into our heads, because humans are energy-conserving machines. And if our brain has a preformed image that reacts to certain words, it will pop it up rather than try and come up with a deeper connotation, simply to save us the energy, because it wants us to survive. And the more you save energy, the more the organism has a chance to survive. And so the bad guys take advantage of this. And you've got to constantly check yourself. This is why I like both Zen and Vipassana as meditations, because if you do Zen, you don't ever stop. It's not like you're only doing it when you're sitting. And the Vipassana is the householder meditation, and that's probably the most powerful on the planet. And it's only to the outside observer that the householder appears to be occupied by his tasks. And at that point, you've so examined your mind that you can say, yeah, this was inbuilt. Someone put this image in there. And then you can say, I wonder why.
I'll have to look into them, because I do a lot of household tasks. I'll have to include the meditation into that, or just look busy. But
yeah, there you go. Same difference.
Yeah. No, you have to. You're right. You have to kind of question, and that's the thing. There's so much disinformation out there. You're going on and questioning, and all we're trying to do, as much as we can, is find the truth. But that's so hard to actually, so hard to find. And I know there's people at the top, like in that, A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise, where he says to who's the actor, Jack Nicholson,
Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson, I want the truth, and he says, you can't handle the truth. Can we, Are we able to handle the truth if they tell us?
No, unfortunately, that's the case. 75% of the population, in my estimation, is unable to have an open mind, and that is not in any way to diminish or denigrate them. What it is actually a something I've observed over time, and that is that to have an open mind, one actually has to take in a concept and model it. In order to model it, you have to enfold it in a temporary fashion, if you will, into your worldview and say, what would my worldview look like if I accepted X, Y, Z as being true? And I found that perhaps 75% of the population is actually incapable of that task. They think they have an open mind, but they are incapable of taking in information, modeling it, and then deciding if it would work for them and extruding it if it does not. And if it does work, they would then integrate it in. And so such an open mind at any point, obviously, you can take information that you assumed was valid in the past, and if new circumstances present themselves, you can throw that information away. You find that most people don't change, and these two conditions would be required for someone to actually change their character. Thus, we find people that, get into and exhibit a certain habitual pattern are likely to continue into that pattern because their mind is actually not capable of being open to what's going on. They're not able to take in a new thing and say, okay, what if I do stop lying and stealing? What will happen? And it just doesn't ever enter into their mind that they could integrate that into their worldview. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I think that's just the way it is with our fellow humans, and that those of us that are able to do this, it's our job to watch out for everybody else, because we're able to say, I think that baboon or that lion is going to exhibit a behavior I've never seen before. Maybe I'd better get that baby out of there right now.
Well, it's funny you should say that, and I totally agree with what you say. Myself and Steve have put together what we call a fluid belief system. And that's exactly what you said. It's about challenging your belief system. What you know today is what you know. Tomorrow you might learn something different that challenges what you know, and just be fluid and change to the new information that comes in. But a lot of people who believe they have an open mind, when you challenge their belief system, sometimes the belief system can be set in stone and sometimes it can be fluid. And say some people who might be religious might, when you kind of challenge their belief system regarding religion, it's set in stone and they won't change it, and that's what they believe and that's it. And as you say, it's the cognitive dissonance, because their life will change if that is real. If we tell them something that goes against what they believe, if we turned around and said, by the way, there's no such thing as Jesus, it was all made up, and they're religious people, the world would probably fall apart. So they just don't want to know. They can't deal with that. I can't deal with that, so I'm going to shut that down, and that's it. And this is why
that's legitimate too. You've got to give them that. That's a very well supported. Yeah, it's a well supported way to go through life, and it works. And so, if someone is that way, I certainly would never attempt to try and push on them anymore. Like over here in the United States, we have this state called Missouri, and it's the Show Me State, and they have all of these sayings. And my father was from that state. He always used to say, you just can't teach that pig to sing. You didn't go to work, and you're just going to irritate the pig.
Yeah, no, totally. And the whole idea, and some people are better left. Don't approach them. Don't try and wake them up, because they'd be a danger to themselves and other people if they actually realized what was going on.
And if you've encountered this, you'll know it, because this was at the point at which you suddenly discovered yourself in a fluid environment in which you assume you're going to be changing it tomorrow. And in fact, if you don't, you're going to start questioning yourself. But then you start losing all of the people that you knew that were your friends and, close relatives and stuff that you used to be able to talk to about normal stuff.
This is it. We're doing the Basis Conference in September. And this is what we're going to be talking about, the whole waking up process and the fluid belief system. Because what happens is you do change. When you start challenging what you believe, you stop watching the TV programs, you maybe stop seeing people that you get on with, because now you don't get on with them because our belief systems are completely different. And it's just amazing how the whole process works. And myself and Steve have gone through this and analysed it. And as I say, we're doing a presentation in September at the conference, and we're going to be talking about this. And from for some people, you know what's really worse as well, though? People who are in the alternative media who will turn around to you and tell you they have an open mind, but when you give them information, they won't even entertain it. You know, they'll close down.
Because of their niche. Because of their niche in that media, yeah. They're as dogmatic as anybody else just about their blue chickens. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's the difficult part. So trying to wake somebody up who apparently is supposed to be awake is even harder than waking somebody up who's not awake.
I would agree with you, and that's why, to a certain extent, I don't like conference kind of things anyway, having been forced into too many of them in a business environment. But the thing there is, you're going to be gathering like minds, and that's not necessarily a good thing. There's no debate, no openness, no challenge to the system. It's a contented little kettle, steaming away all to itself.
Yeah. Well, we're doing the conference as we've been asked to do it, and I'm sure it's going to be good fun anyway. We're going to be meeting, a number of people there, and the whole idea is to not so much see, one of the things we talk about with the waking up process, but I think what we also have to do as human beings is that we have to move from the teenage mind to the adult mind. The teenage mind is the ego and ignorance, and the adult mind is the wisdom and humility. And when society gets to wisdom and humility...
No, sorry about that. I would disagree. I would say you've made a big error in assumption there, and I would agree with the first part, that we've got to get out of the teenage mind, and I would agree that it's all wrapped up. But I would say that teenage is far less... I don't buy in the concept of ego. That comes from Shlomo Freud, and he was wrong about that. But the hormones of the teenager, we've got to become an adult. The transition between a teenager and an adult is not wisdom, because an adult does not have wisdom as much as they may strive to learn it. What they do have, though, that is different from a teenager is simply one thing, and that's responsibility.
Okay, so responsible for your actions. Your own actions.
And everybody else is around you as well, to some extent, or at least to cleaning up the messes, right? You're not responsible for how they feel and that kind of thing, but you are responsible for dealing with your immediate environment in a factual way. And there's also a difference between facts and truth. Someone comes to me and says, "Let me tell you my truth." I say, "No, I don't give a damn about your truth. Tell me some facts, and then we got something we can discuss." Truth is your emotions that are hooked onto a fact, whether it's valid or not.
So what we are really talking about is common law, because common law, or harm, loss, or injury, basically you taking responsibility for yourself and the people around you, and being responsible for your actions. Like I do talk about this kind of teenage mind and the adult mind. The person who goes out and he goes into a bar and he has 6 points and he says, right, I'm okay to drive. I drive better with 6 points, and he gets in the car and he could either harm himself or somebody else. For me, that's the teenage mind. The adult mind is no, I've had a drink, I'll leave the car here and I'll get a taxi home, or get a lift home and I'll pick up the car in the morning. That's the adult mind for me.
I would agree that it is a question of you, as an adult, you recognize your presence and the harm it could do, as well as potentially any good, but you first have to guard against that harm. You have to be in the ahimsa, or do no harm mind. And I would certainly agree with that, because you're not doing you have the bravado and all of that. Where does that come from? It comes from the hormones, not from thinking, but from reacting to the hormones.
Right, okay, that's it. That's bang on. We have more questions for you there, Steve.
Yes, we certainly do. Where we go? We'll go with Dave. Dave said, I have a question for Clif. What if the smart dust, when we spoke about this earlier, what if the smart dust responds to or is activated by scalar longitudinal waves? The EMF transverse waves of telecom masts are not required.
That would be accurate, but in our reality, we as humans are unable to make something that is smaller than the electron, that would then still respond to a scalar wave. Everything we build has to begin at least the electron level, because that's the smallest thing we've got that responds to the scalar wave in any way, shape, or form. So we're again back to size limitation. There's no way to get command and control instructions to something that small, even if that thing could take along with it some form of rudimentary firmware.
What if there was some, I'm going out on a limb here, but what if there was some extraterrestrial type technology that could?
Well, see, here's the thing. Extraterrestrial, you're going to say, okay, it violates the level of physics. Well, my level of physics is very open. I understand a lot of what Tesla was talking about and so on. I understand the nature of energy at a level most people do not. And regardless of where these extraterrestrials come from, they would have to be subjected to what I call the ever-present now. The ever-present now is the aggregation of time as it comes into the universe, into our materium here. And so that is the finite limitation on everything. It's 22 trillion times a second pulse, so there is nothing. Our materium is created at its base level by this pulse, and therefore that forms how energy works. So the aliens could come from the Pleiades for all I care, but they're still going to be dealing with the electron as the limitation for the passing of command and control instructions. There's no way to engineer something finer than that. And Kozyrev proved this with his many experiments over 20 years in which he proved we could alter time, and we could even alter life within time, and that the ultimate level of perception or reaction to time is what we laughingly call the electron, which is not solid matter, but is the nexus of these energies that are occurring at 22 trillion times a second, or about 3.4 times Avogadro's number.
I won't even claim to have understand half of what you said there, Cliff. It's obviously all very, very highly technical, and I'm sorry.
Well, look at it this way. Okay? Say that a scalar wave was the ability to disturb grains of sand on a beach. And we could look and we could see the sand being disturbed even if we couldn't see what was causing the disturbance, right?
Yeah.
But no matter what, if it was any smaller than a grain of sand, it wouldn't react. And therefore, that is our limitation, that no matter what the size of the scalar wave, how its amplitude or frequency, if it can't be reacting in the grain of sand, we'll never see it. It's beyond our scope. And so we couldn't manipulate it if we tried, nor could a space alien. They're going to be, if their bodies are not composed of electrons, they are not going, and matter as we understand it, they are not going, they may, if it's not composed of that, they may well be able to manipulate a smart dust, but they would never create a smart dust because their bodies are not made of solid matter.
Okay. That kind of makes it a little bit simpler for me, and hopefully anyone else who was kind of in my shoes and didn't understand. I'll move on with the questions.
Let's divert for a half second.
Okay, yeah.
Sure, just into the idea of the smart dust itself and why it's out there. Who put it out there? And it's all tied up to this idea of fear of AI.
Yeah.
And what is AI? Supposedly artificial intelligence. Well, we have expert systems now in software that everybody in the software marketing world is calling AI, but it's not artificial intelligence. It's not intelligent. It's just software code that runs in a predetermined fashion. There is no such thing as artificial intelligence on this planet in the hands of the military or anybody else, and there's no such thing as a self-aware computer, nor can there ever be, because there is no self there to become aware of. So a computer would have to have hormones. It would have to have sensors that it felt at risk. It would have to have a computer would not, for instance, feel a need for self-preservation even if it's programmed into it. It could not tell, for instance, that the electrical plug you're about to kick out of the wall is its lifeblood. It would have no way of knowing that. And it has no sensor apparatus or any of this kind of stuff. So this fiction was created by someone that wanted us to be afraid of AI, smart computers, and all of this kind of thing. So I have to wonder why. And the people that are promulgating it are not doing anybody a service without examining these thoughts. If you can't show me an AI, it does not exist. There is no smart dust because nobody has ever had any evidence of it. There's no evidence of any blue avians because nobody has any evidence of it. Or they don't exist because we don't have any evidence of it here. And if we don't have evidence of it, then it's speculation and deserves to be considered as simple speculation. So to talk about the dust as though it exists, or even AI as though it exists, is more than a marketing ploy, is going down a hole that someone wants us to go down. And I don't usually. Just because they want me to.
It's just funny that Elon Musk is talking about AI, but then again, he's obviously talking about it for a reason.
Mm-hmm. What are the things they're not talking about? Ask yourself that. They're out there talking about AI. Are they saying shit about, excuse my language, about CERN? Are they saying anything at all about quantum computers? No.
D-Wave computers, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, we did touch base on D-Wave there a couple of shows back. We're talking to Mick about it as well. One in Geneva, and I forget where the second one was. I think they have two of them.
There's a bunch of them. There's one is in a Google shared operation in California. There's a couple over in NASA in Houston. There's a bunch of the D-Wave style machines that were the early precursors along the east coast of the United States and one in Canada. As far as I know, there's 7 in the EU.
Do you believe that we are in a holographic program?
Yes, but I don't think it's meaningful. I don't think it's in any way different than reality. I think here's what I think reality is. Okay, I think that reality exists from this pulse. The pulse comes out, it goes through the entire material universe as we understand it, and it does so without any time at all because time is not defined for the pulse. But from our perspective, this pulse happens 22 trillion times a second, and there's a pause 22 trillion times a second. The pulse is when we're awake and moving, and the pause we don't even perceive, and that is what allows us to move because of the way that all the atoms are all connected. Atoms don't even really exist. The pulse is just or atoms are just the nexus of all of the pulse running into itself, crashing back and forth into itself, creating all these little points of complexity. And so the pulse creates all these bazillions upon bazillions, an uncalculable number of points of complexity as it crashes in on itself. And because our minds only operate at about 60 frames a second maximally, we only see solid matter. Because we have within our minds our bodies as solid matter, when they reach out and touch something, and because their sensors work at such a slow level and not 22 trillion times a second, we can never touch anything when it is not there. Ergo, we think the universe is solid. How is that different from a holographic thing? There's no computer behind it. There's no big laser doing it. There's no man in a little sky machine up there causing all this to occur. But the net effect, as far as our consciousness is concerned, is the same. It might as well be a holograph, or a holodeck like in Star Trek, because we could never ever tell the difference once it gets over about 8 trillion times a second. Our ability to measure things is really about that level. So anything beyond that, we're going to assume as solid matter because we can't catch it in any of the other states. And we know what I'm saying is true because we now know that we've caught water in more than one form of fluid state. And we've caught it because we could look a little bit faster than we had been able to before.
So who created the pulse?
The pulse is self-creating. There is no who behind it. You have to understand that there is nothing other than consciousness, okay? There is no differentiation between solid matter and consciousness. We know this. How do we know this? Because we use consciousness to perceive solid matter. And it's all internal. So if matter actually existed, it would be immaterial to us, joke there, but it wouldn't matter to us because our consciousness is what is perceiving it. So if I trick my fingers by touching something and my fingers tell my consciousness it's solid, then it is solid. And it need not have a who or a personality behind it. A personality only exists within this materium where we've sliced our consciousness up into little tiny chunks and call them Bob and Steve and Cliff, right? That kind of thing. Okay, so if we didn't slice our consciousness up into little tiny chunks, we wouldn't perceive ourselves this way, but it might be kind of boring. We wouldn't have anybody to talk to. We'd just be us, one big thing. And so that's sort of fundamentally what's going on. We are the who that has created the pulse because consciousness is that pulse. It's really, really goofy to think about from this side of the death barrier.
That's, what, that is a conversational piece for in the pub a few beers.
I think either more than a few, or one is not enough, and 1,000 is, or 1,000 is not enough, and one is too many.
That's definitely a sit down with a pint and to talk about it. We've got more questions for you there, Cliff. Steve.
We do. I've got a quick fire these. Tommy was wondering, can you please ask Cliff if the trouble in Qatar is related to them not accepting the petrodollar any longer and sliding towards the BRICS countries for energy trade?
That's one of the manifestations, but it's a minor one. It has very little to do with that. That's one of the also ran potentials. People will cite those kind of things. But at its core, what we're looking at here is the inability of Islam to continue under its current course. Why it's coming at this particular time may have to do with the unknown energies from space that are affecting humans. And thus, because we're all jittery, we're expressing it this way. And so finally, the constraints that have been pushing on the Islamic world based on their structure are coming to a head. You have to understand that Islam is different than most other religions in that it has a codicil in it that says that Muhammad is the last prophet, which basically means that you can never reform Mohammedanism. And yet it is in desperate need of reformation because the Wahhabites, who are basically, who are in fact despised by the vast majority of regular people in the Islamic world, have gotten way out of hand, and the Wahhabites are a danger to themselves and others, and therefore the pressures in Islam have got to explode at this point, and they've got to deal with it. Qatar, Saudi Arabia are deep in the Wahhabi issues. Saudi Arabia doesn't exist without Wahhabism. It helped form Saudi Arabia, and yet it was a terrible, bloody part of their history where they had the Brits come on in and kill hundreds of thousands of Wahhabi warriors just because they couldn't control them. And it was all over the king wanting mod cons, back in the 20s. So that's what's going on. It's a religious battle. If our data sets are correct, it's going to erupt. It's going to get incredibly bloody, and when it's all over, Mecca will be basically a smoking heap. And then thereafter, who knows how Islam will define itself with that central pillar gone.
There's an awful lot of talk about this year being very, very special, 2017, and forecasts for September, October for this year, what's going on. What's your data sets coming up with for this year?
That's pretty spot on. It is key. The data sets don't tell us why. I've got some reasons for thinking that it has to do with the alignments of Saturn and Jupiter and how they pull on our orbit, and again some of the unknown energies from space.
That's the 23rd of September, yeah. That's the alignment, yeah.
Yeah, September and October are going to be very interesting because we've got this eclipse this year. We've got all this seismic activity. The alignment of the Saturn and Jupiter also pulls on our planet and causes a great amount of earthquakes, which also liberates other kinds of energies, which gets everybody jumpy, etc. So you can certainly see it at that level. But also we have the echoes of the past. We're over 100 years since the formation of the Federal Reserve in the United States and the beginning of this paper experiment. Mm. We're at the end of the death of the dollar that was created by Richard Nixon when he took us off the gold standard in 1972. Most currencies don't last as long as the dollar has. It's way old, way long in the tooth. It's dying, as we're seeing with the cryptocurrencies. So all kinds of things are coming to a head. And then we, of course, have the rigidification of thought, and many people are responding to the emotional energies from space at a hormonal level and are not thinking, and thus are simply reacting. And so we've got all of that going on as well. Now, picking out any particular date is going to be probably less than useful, but alignments are certainly key for us, and a week ahead and then thereafter. So I suspect that September is going to be rocky, to say the least. Our data sets have actually had 2017 as being a definitive year, a temporal marker year, in the sense that 2 years from now or 3 years from now, people will be able to look back and say, it all began in the summer of 17.
Yeah, because we've heard for the last few years, it's September, and every time September comes around, nothing happens. So we're hearing people again saying September again. Now, we do know about if we look at the facts, we know the banking system is a lot of banks are trading insolvent. 2008 was just a hiccup compared to what they're saying is going to happen. If the derivatives market goes bang, which is probably the first one to go, the futures market, then the whole house of cards is going to collapse. And whether we have massive inflation, or it's going to be a societal upset, and this is why the millionaires and billionaires are buying the land, in New Zealand, or getting the silos. All this is kind of talked about, but at the moment, the banks cannot keep doing quantitative easing.
Sure they can. Sure they can.
So you think they're going to carry on printing and printing and printing?